Welcome back to the Purpose Over Profit podcast. This week, we've got Paul Johnstone on the pod. He owns a business called 4S Bid, and his background's in procurement, which is where his business specialises. Now, granted, that's not the most exciting of categories or industries you can imagine. Certainly my perception of it is from 18 years in business or in my corporate job. But Paul's a really great guy, and actually most of the conversation is around business strategy and how his business supports small businesses to not only improve their processes and practices to win more business, but to be focusing on the right type of business to be going after in the first place, which definitely sits in the business strategy space. So listen, I think you're going to love this episode. Lots of really great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Purpose Over Profit podcast. As usual, I'm with my co-host, Darren Green. How are you, Darren?
Yeah, I'm really good, mate. I'm really good. Schools are back today up in Glasgow, so I've got my eldest off to school this morning, which was a wee tad emotional for my wife, not so much for me, no. I think, but it was lovely to kind of see them go off and grow up a wee bit. So yeah, all good, and means we've got a wee bit more time. No kids shouting in the background today on today's episode.
And I think our guest Paul will vouch for that as well. So Paul, do you want to introduce to our listeners a bit about yourself, if that's okay?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks for inviting me on, Chris and Darren. So yeah, Paul Johnstone set up a company called 4S Bid in October 2019. So my backstory, I suppose, is I've spent over 10 years in public procurement, and I think we're going to chat about that in a wee bit. But not the most exciting subject, but we'll try and spruce it up a wee bit. But basically, what I've done is I've kind of set up a bid company to help good companies bid for these contracts successfully and understand, what the challenges are that they've faced. So yeah, been going for over sort of 18 months now, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that.
And I think as well, like, just you're the same as Darren. Your youngest is away into Primary 1 today as well.
Yeah, Primary 1 today. So that's the two of them now away to school. And as Darren was saying, the two of them are fine going in. So no real issues, no tears, no tantrums, anything like that. So all good.
And I'm guessing a much quieter household like Darren. Is that right, Darren?
Aye, absolutely. Much quieter.
Yeah, and listen, we love a challenge. Paul, I've just finished with 4 Monroes over the summer with guys with our Facebook group, which is affiliated with the podcast. But our challenge today is to make procurement exciting. Yeah.
Aye, absolutely.
Well, in all honesty, Paul, that's why I wanted to get you on, because procurement for me in the past, I've worked for a big corporation and I've dealt with procurement before. And we spoke about this before we came on, and like I was a kind of individual that procurement people hate. So there's a certain threshold that I think it's £10,000. Once you go above that, you have to get procurement involved for these, and you have to do a tender bids, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So I was always that person that would say, how much is that going to be? 25 grand? Let's just cut it into 3 different chunks so we don't have to get procurement involved. So that was a procurement nightmare. But then luckily in my last company, we had this lady who joined not long before I left, and she helped, the lady Gillian. She's amazing. And she was just so down to earth, helped the process as well. And that helped me understand that procurement can be interesting and can be fun and can be engaging. Is that, I mean, if you want to explain your background a bit further, that would help our listeners understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, what you've summarised there is pretty accurate in terms of, so as I say, I was in procurement for over 10 years. When I first joined, and what I should say as well, I've qualified, so I have like a chartership, so I'm a chartered procurement manager, similar to the likes of chartered accountancies and things like that. So there is an actual professional qualification, a professional body. And I got into procurement. I didn't really know much about it when I was at uni or anything like that. Not probably many people do, but it is actually it should be more exciting and more involved within businesses. But I think it doesn't help itself really with the sort of rules that people have to jump through and processes that people need to follow. And there's always, I've been in public and private sector, and there's always this perception that procurement's going to slow the whole thing down, and they'll run a process to save £10 rather than actually adding any value to things. And that's where I think your sort of perception comes from, Chris, and it's something that many people struggle with when it comes to having to engage with procurement. And I think what I was saying to you earlier was the sort of human element. I tried to take a sort of common sense approach to things where, yes, we have the rules, but ultimately when you're working for an organisation, you would be my colleague, Chris, so I want to help you get the outcome that you want. So I would work with people to sort of work within the rules to get you the outcome that you wanted, but didn't always work like that. And particularly public sector, because there are so many rules, it's quite risk averse. And if you've got other people to answer to who are quite risk averse, then sometimes that common sense goes out the window, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen all the fallout from, without politicising the podcast, Chris, we've seen all the fallout from like all the COVID procurement processes where, it's like, yeah, if your mate's with an ex-Tory, yep, we'll give them the contract. But
Yeah.
You can see there's a real public misconception about, I guess, the procurement policy. I think there's a real need for honesty and transparency, but not kind of getting bogged down in the red tape, or So how do you go about doing that?
Well, I think again, it is there's both sides have got a part to play in that. That's the actual client who's procuring whatever contract they're looking to put in place, but there's also the bidding side of the kind of negotiation. So I think in my estimation, I think what's happened is, we love rules in this country and we love processes. So we've kind of started with something, and before we know it, we've kind of got ourselves into this sort of overly rules-based approach where common sense goes out the window. And as I said, we're very risk averse as well. So, there's this perception from the procurement side that, if we do something wrong, someone's going to challenge us. It's going to cost us a whole load of money and bad PR and things like that. So we're going to stick firmly to the rules. Whereas, as I said, my approach was always to try and find common sense. One, for the person I was trying to help, like my kind of stakeholder, but also for the bidding companies, because ultimately it costs a lot of money to bid for some of these contracts in terms of internal resource, opportunity cost, etc. So, you've got to make it fair for everyone to take part, but also be realistic with people to say, look, maybe this isn't the right opportunity for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you're actually doing them a favour by, sort of being honest with them. But, as I say, common sense doesn't always apply. And I think that's where a lot of people get frustrated with procurement, from both sides of the table, to be honest.
And I think I'd have to, again, from personal experience, I mean, I'd say that what you're saying there is 100% right and accurate, because people, the more processes sometimes you put in place, the less control people feel they have of making an intuitive decision about stuff as well.
Yeah.
So that's what I found about a previous company. There was so many processes in place that they had to tick so many boxes. Even when you were bringing on a new agency involved or looking at an agency framework or retainer or anything like that, the common sense aspect was never there. Or there'd be opportunities to even drive down the price as much as possible and try and squeeze it out. And you'd say, it doesn't matter that this agency is cheaper, the quality isn't as good, but all the procurement says that's cheaper and actually what you're getting is more. And sometimes, and what I found, like I said before in the end with Gillian, I can't remember her surname, I'll find it, Gillian was fantastic, where she came on board and she just sat down with me and said, what are you trying to do for the year? What do you need to try and achieve? What's your budget? What's your constraints? Okay, let's work together. And that was the first time I dealt with somebody in that human element as well, apart from contractors coming in. But then contractors coming from a procurement point of view is harder because you don't feel you've got that trusted association.
Yeah.
And it takes time to build that up.
Yeah.
But I think that what's become successful is the human aspect, which I think you've touched upon, which is fantastic.
And I think, I think it's all about, if you think of it, the contractor or the company who's actually going to deliver the service, they know more about the service than anybody will. So really, there should be more of a collaborative approach, I think. how we get to that, I don't really know, but that's what I tried as much as I could. And kind of the point I would make on what you are, to kind of summarise, I suppose, is that old saying of you buy cheap, you buy twice sort of thing.
Yeah.
The amount of times that I've seen that happen, just because, you know, procurement are trying to save £10 or something like that, you know, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point, is that it's always lowest cost over quality.
Well, my wife works in the NHS. She's a nurse, so she would vouch for that as well. You like, it's all driven by price, and the amount of times that they've tried to either replace one thing and you got to use 3 times the amount just to do the previous job, which is quite shocking as well. I mean, Darren mentioned honest integrity, which I think leads one of your values to a point as well. And
Yeah.
I mean, can you tell us then about, obviously your journey was you're working public and private. How long were you considering making the jump to start your own business?
So I've been thinking about it for probably about 2 or 3 years at least. And in all honesty, I've always wanted to have my own business and be in control of my own sort of destiny. I suppose it's that kind of fear factor of, you know, what if it doesn't work? You know, what am I going to do? All this kind of stuff. But I mean, I got to the point where I've been fairly successful in a career point of view. I've delivered some big projects, and you know, I thought I could actually, the reason for setting this business up is I could actually see some really good businesses, great at what they do, but just not being able to get over the hurdle of winning these contracts. And I thought, you know, there's a real opportunity here. So I've been thinking about doing it for 2 or 3 years, but set it up sort of October 2019, launched it fully in March last year, but ultimately straight into a pandemic. But you know, they say if you can survive this, you can survive anything. So just got to keep fighting.
That's Darren. Dan, you've mentioned that to me before, isn't it? About it's probably not the best time to start a business during a pandemic. But when is the best time? Because you started your own business as well.
I think you'll find a time, like you'll find an excuse. Like it's a bit like having kids. Like we're all sat here with kids. When's the right time to have a kid? There isn't one. When's the right time to kind of leave your job? There's probably lots of wrong times to leave your job, but like you say, you've built up experience. You had confidence in your ability. You're accredited. There's a lot there kind of going for you in your like in terms of your ability to go and step into that space. It's not going to be easy, but yeah, I think there's certainly no good time to do it. So I just want to unpick that a little bit because I'm completely naive. I'm probably never been as close to the procurement process as Chris, certainly within the corporate world. But it sounds like you've been working in public and private sector, and then you step out and you're now supporting small companies or small medium-sized companies get the growth that they want by winning bids. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So again, you know, as I said, these processes can be fairly complex, time-consuming, costly. So what I'm trying to do, and more than just, you know, fill in documents and send them away and hope for the best, it's about using that experience that I've gained over 10 years to sort of say, look, try and position companies and start from a blank sheet of paper and kind of think about it as an overall strategy. What is it they're trying to achieve? Why do they want to work in these kind of public sector parts of the public sector? And, you know, take it as a kind of strategic approach. And it's actually about, you know, not bidding for every single contract just because, you know, it says the service that you can deliver. It's actually about making it more strategic and ultimately reducing the cost of their bidding, but winning more sort of thing. So trying to be that sort of experienced kind of support that they've not maybe got internally. And it's a wee bit about education as well, I suppose, and using that experience that I've built up over 10 years of what does good look like.
Yeah, it sounds a lot to me like, you know, I'm thinking of the analogy of applying for a job. You know, you've got like a scattergun approach where you're just kind of like hoping that you kind of hit something just through sheer volume. And I don't know why it's a gun analogy, but it was always described to me as this. And it's like, what sounds like you're trying to do is be way more efficient. So it's a bit like a shotgun. It's not going to have the range of a, you know, like scattergun approach, but you're like, no, like conserve your effort and kind of, you know, put it over the right areas where you're going to get most success, and it's aligned to the values and the work and the service you want to go and provide.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that I have to have with companies sometimes, is that, you know, they see it as, well, we can do this job, we can win this contract, and there's no doubt that they can do the job, but it's actually, who are they up against, what do they know about the client, all these kind of questions. And it is quite it's quite an emotionally driven decision to go for something, but it's also quite stressful being on and being part of these processes. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is, you know, instead of going for, let's say, 10 contracts in a year and you win 2, why don't we go for 3 that you can really go for and have a great chance of winning, and maybe win 1 or 2? Would that not be better? And overall, you know, in terms of your return on investment, your profit, and growing your business, you know, would that not be better for you, rather than, you know, all the time, heartache and effort that goes into each one of these, and then the heartache that goes with losing, because that is painful.
I guess as well, Paul, I mean, I remember talking to you about this ages ago, and even some of my own clients who went for bids and they won some and lost some, or even not even applied for some. So, I mean, I remember you mentioned it's about relationships as well. Do you have a relationship with organisations? Do you know who the organisation is? Do they know you? Because if you're going to, like Darren said about the kind of scattergun approach, you're going to just apply for them cold and you don't know that relationship, then they're going to go, who are you? And even my own client, they've even been approached before by companies saying, listen, do you want a tender for this? And all they found out they're just there to make up the numbers.
Yeah.
They decide not to even bother. Yeah, it's just, and you've got to be conscious of that, which I don't think people are probably fully aware of as well.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think, you know, there's this perception, particularly in public sector, is that, you know, there's this overly complex process and everybody's treated equally, and that is absolutely true. That is the case. But, you know, one thing I say to people all the time is that in my sort of 10 plus years experience in procurement, whether it was public sector or private sector, I'd never been involved in a project where we had awarded the contract to a company we hadn't heard of beforehand, either me or somebody, so me or a budget holder or an end user of the contract. Now, that's not to say, that's different from saying you award all the contracts to your friends or people that you know. That's not what happens. What does happen though is we're trying to de-risk. So companies can say anything they like and they can present fantastic looking pitches and documents and things like that, but if we don't know who they are, then that's a huge risk to the company. So, you know, it's that whole thing of, and that's one thing that I do preach to clients quite a lot, is that if you don't know who the client is, the chances are someone else does, and therefore I would say sort of 8 or 9 times out of 10 you should actually decide, we're not going for this because we don't know enough about it. Someone else will have, and we're kind of wasting our time.
It's
What do you reckon?
Sorry, Dazin, you go.
Sorry, what do you recommend for small businesses that are, you know, we maybe have some that are listening to this, but what do you recommend in terms of small businesses? They don't have that in with the company, the expertise. Is there a bit of kind of pro bono work or support that you would expect them to go and start to, I guess, work with those 2 or 3 organisations that you might potentially want to bid for in the future, or there's a bit of work maybe coming down the pipeline? How does that work?
So that word there that you mentioned, pipeline, that's probably the first starting point I would talk to any client about, is who do you want to work with, and do you know what opportunities that they've got that you could provide? So there's lots of information, particularly I'm talking a lot here about public sector. There's lots of information on their own websites and all the sort of main public procurement sites that will help you build a pipeline up to maybe 5 years away from now, to say, I know what contracts that my target clients have got, and I'm going to go and start speaking to them. Let them find out about me and me find out about them. And then from there, you've already raised your profile. And that thing that I talked about of, not awarding a contract to a company you've never heard of, that goes away almost instantly. But you need to keep, it's almost like business development. It is essentially business development. Like you would do in any other sector or any other way of winning work, you would build up relationships with clients. So there's plenty of opportunity to do that. And for small businesses, there's various different support out there. So companies like 4S Bid, or there's the supplier development program that give you lots of training and things like that on how to, if you've never done it before, how do you start? What do you do? What do you need to think about? So there's loads of help out there.
So just on that point, and just to make it simple for me then, so it's about understanding where you want to go, who your target market is, and what kind of public contracts or private contracts you want to apply for.
Yeah.
And then it's about your awareness and building up that relationship with these companies so that they're aware of you, because like anyone else, nobody's going to do business with you unless they don't know you or been recommended to you.
Yeah.
It takes that relationship to a point. So is that a kind of easy and quick summary for people?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good summary, Chris. And the one thing I would say, and kind of getting back to the point about procurement, would be to understand, in that organisation, who are the decision makers? So who do you need to speak to? So for example, procurement would be the gatekeeper. So, if you want to find out about things, they wouldn't maybe be your first port of call. So what you want to try and do is find out who makes the decisions, who holds the budget, who actually uses the contract. And then maybe procurement would be the last piece of the jigsaw. But yeah, absolutely. Build relationships. Again, another kind of saying that you've probably heard of is people buy from people. So it's no difference at all,
And can I just ask, what does 4S stand for? I've got it in front of me, but it may be good for our listeners to understand this as well.
Yeah, so the 4S is simple, structured, strategic. So that's my approach. So keep things simple, and all the jargon and all the rules and all the bureaucracy that goes around public procurement. That's why I set the business up, to keep it simple and just help clients cut through that. Structured, as I said, getting back to not that scattergun approach. Strategic. The point I'm making here is that it should be part of your overall company strategy, and it's not just a side of desk job, which I did see, in my previous life. And then if you do those three things, the fourth one is success. So leads to your success. So that's where 4S comes from.
It does sound like a really strategic approach to it. I mean, all the things that you just mentioned, we went down talking about pipeline. It's like, well, who do you want to work with? What are they trying to do? How can you help them? So all of these things are, from a strategy point of view, are fundamental to your ability to add value in a marketplace. Like if you don't understand that as a business, you're not going to be able to serve anyone in the first place. So like it does seem like that applying that lens to, I suppose, any business, but particularly from a procurement standpoint, is going to fill your pipeline with the right type of clients and focus the mind as to how do you go and warm them up through, who do you need to speak to and how can you support them before you get into a bid process.
Absolutely. And then the whole point of that is that the intelligence that you gather as you do this and speak to the client and your target stakeholders, you can use that to then form your bid, and then that's how your bid, if you get to that point, stands out from the competition who haven't done this work. I'm trying to teach not a different way, but the right way to do it. But it's maybe an approach that companies don't think about, but I've seen it.
I was surprised. I mean, I was looking through the stuff you do. So you do bid writing, bid strategy, training, research, data and insights. And I didn't really expect the kind of gap analysis to pop up when I was looking through that stuff. Because for me, like from a brand strategy point of view, I do the kind of, obviously do the research for the client, look at your target market, which you guys done. Even my own clients, I've seen them doing bids. I've never seen them doing the kind of the concept of gap analysis. And I was really surprised at that. But is that just a standard thing in bid strategy you do?
Yeah, so what I've developed over the last sort of 6 months or so is a new service or a new solution called the Bid Journey. So basically that's about, is essentially for the SME market to say, they want to maybe bid successfully for more public contracts. So in order to do that, we've developed a diagnostic that will look at their whole business in sort of 6 or 7 areas, identify where are they now, where do they want to get to, and what's that gap. And then from there, we can then say, well, you need to build your pipeline, or all the things we've talked about, even things like marketing strategy. So I work with some quite big companies as well. And what you'll see there is that, let's say they're bidding to build a school or a college or whatever, they'll be putting out on LinkedIn or on their website or elsewhere previous examples of colleges or schools, or things like community benefits that are a big topic. They'll be talking about that, but that's all subtle marketing towards the client that they're bidding to now. So it's all those areas that we identify, and then it's for our client to say, well, yeah, we can do that in-house, or like, for example, 4S Bid can help develop all that as well. Because again, we know what good looks like, and successful bidding is more than just the tender submission that you put back. There's a lot more to it than that if you want to do it successfully on a regular, sustainable basis.
It's very much more a holistic point of view, which I was really surprised at. I mean, obviously, I've seen these fantastic creative agencies when there's a bid going in. I remember one for, it was it was like a kind of cyber bank or something like this, cyber bank analysis, and they created this vault that the client had to try and break into to get their bid, and they couldn't get into it without this company coming in and giving them the code to enter the bid and all this kind of stuff. And that was a really clever, intuitive way. But that's thinking again about the strategy of changing and standing out from the crowd as well, which I found really clever. But that's all very good. But if you don't have the content right, you're not going to succeed, are you?
No, you're absolutely right. And the kind of key thing there is, each bid, or if you're bidding to me, in my previous role, I don't really care what, and with all due respect, I don't really care what you wrote for the last client. I want you to tell me how you're going to solve my problem. And that's one of the biggest things where companies fall down, is that they lift their previous bid off a shelf and dust it down, maybe change the client name and then submit it. And really, that's not good enough. So it is that whole end-to-end journey of, building up the relationship, finding out what do they look for in a client, what is their problem, and how can you solve it. And actually, the last bit, the writing of the bid is actually the last step of the journey, not the first. That's where companies always start with the bid, but that should actually be the last bit for successful bidding, really.
So I want to kind of dive into, like, probably more from a personal side, in terms of thinking your transition from corporate into like the business world. 2019, like you said, it was just before a pandemic, but I wonder if you can talk a bit about kind of your thoughts building up to that, the decision to jump, and I guess anything that you've kind of learned about yourself across that period of time as you made that transition.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, I thought about this seriously for a couple of years, and through, let's say, negative experiences with like people in work and employment. It's one of them where you go, well, if you really want to do this, and this is the way you're feeling about employment, when is it ever going to be the right time if it's not now? So that's where I thought, well, let's go for it. Spoke to my wife, she was really supportive about it, brilliant, to be honest. And then you think, well, I gave myself that period between sort of October, when I actually registered the company in Companies House, and March when I started, to go out and start speaking to people and tell them what my intention was. And I had a little bit of work lined up, which was good, fortunately, because of what happened, obviously. So that gave me a good starting point. But in terms of what I've learned, like, you learn things all the time, like every day. I think the challenge for business owners is like where they've maybe come from, corporate or whatever, and they make the odd decision, but they've got managers above them or team members that can help make the decision. When you're in a small business for yourself, it's you that makes every single decision all the time. So in terms of, who do you go and work with? What do you want to do? What do you charge them? What's your service? Everything is all about decision making. and that's been a big thing for me as well, is like learning just to make the decision, whether it's right or wrong. You make a decision, you stick with it and you go with it. But ultimately, I suppose the thing as well is that, like, you know, I think what I started out with in maybe October 2019 is completely different now, because you learn and you adjust, and it's that whole thing of, you know, I've put a picture out on LinkedIn a few months ago where, you know, the mountain's up there and the clouds are covering the top, but the journey, you're kind of on the journey, but you don't know, you know roughly where you're aiming for, but you're not sure exactly where it is.
I think Darren will like that because of the Monroe kind of
I
analogy.
love
there,
that.
but
Like, I was looking at Ben Nevis was exactly like that yesterday. There was no false peak because you couldn't actually see the summit for the whole climb of Ben Nevis. But no, I love that. There's so much in there around like not being the right time, not being the best time to kind of go and do it. If I want things to change, I need to go and make them change now. And just kind of so honest about the transition. Like, you do end up doing everything. So whilst you've normally got finance or admin, you know, you've got people that will be doing things for you. Like, I always remember this, an old boss going into his you know, starting off himself, and he's like, yeah, I'm building my own office furniture and stuff like that. And it's just that, managing that whole transition into you know, into as a business owner, and yeah, definitely making it iterative. Like, of course the world's changed, so your like businesses have had to change and adapt, but also your vision for what it can be and where you want to get it to, kind of keeping that almost malleable, so you can navigate into and shape that as you go, because it's, you know, being too narrow and defined is potentially going to be losing you business as opposed to helping you grow.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think even a simple thing like, you know, I'd set up a bid consultancy. When clients hear the word bid, I think what they think is, oh, well, Paul, write your bid for you and you know, we'll leave it all to you. Now, actually, that is part of what service I'm offering, but really that whole thing that I've just described there in terms of the best practice and the gap analysis and all that, that's probably more of where I see the business going now. But that's all things that I've learned as I've kind of started the business, got clients on board, had a lot of success, to be honest with you, in terms of helping clients win contracts. But there is a lot to writing bids, and it's not just, or being successful in bids, and that's what you learn every single day, is like, where is your niche?
And I love all this, Paul. I love the fact that you've mentioned all this, and there's something that people don't appreciate as well, which is the personal aspect. Because I've seen as well, you were saying, I'm on a holiday, I'm going to be taking a break, and I think the year before that you didn't take much of a break, and it's all that, because when you have your own business, people just see sometimes the rosy things that you work on, they don't really understand it. Yeah, you've got to do the hard work as well to grow your business, but there's also that family aspect. You've got young kids as well, so you need to give yourself permission to take holidays as well and take time off, which is a completely different mindset as well.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? It's like you don't think twice when you're employed. You know, you've got whatever it is, the 28 days a year or whatever, holidays. Whereas when you're working for yourself, it's like, you know, if I don't work, I'm not getting paid, sort of thing. So when am I going to do this? But yeah, it's all that kind of learning journey. But it's great. I mean, I wouldn't change it.
So you've touched upon briefly there. You touched upon, like, obviously you didn't imagine what you'd be doing now to a point. I mean, you're talking about the gap analysis. So is that how you're looking at the company? You're seeing it as more strategic, more strategy involved, led, helping these organisations grow from a holistic point of view, but still doing what you need to do, the kind of the stuff you're highly trained at, which is the bid writing as well. So where do you want to see the business go in the future?
So I've got a vision of this business, like, so if the whole bid journey would essentially become my business model. But where I see it going really would be sort of training, and where I see a big opportunity is data and decisioning. So, for example, if I take one example, so if I was to work with a client on maybe 5 or 10 bids, you know, what's the kind of trends? Where are they winning? Where are they losing? You know, what type of contract is it? What value? All these types of things, and ultimately, that's for me as 4S Bid, but also for our clients to say, well, you know, in terms of the contracts we're going for, are we picking the right ones, or are we not, or are there things that we're continually losing out on that we need to go and strengthen and do differently? So again, it's all about, you know, helping clients optimize the opportunities that they're bidding for, rather than just that sort of bidding for anything approach. And I do see with the sort of technology and AI and, you know, data, I think that's a huge opportunity for businesses.
But you're right. I mean, especially if a business comes to you and they're unsure as to what area they should be approaching, if you've got that data and insights available, and Darren was an insight manager for SSE as well, so you'll appreciate all this stuff as well. And data is crucial as well, and that will influence your market. And instead of going back to Darren's fantastic scattergun approach as well, that gives you that kind of opportunity to kind of really have that laser focus, so that then you can pick what kind of clients you want to go, resource it well, and save money during the process as well.
Yeah, because ultimately it's not about the number of contracts you bid for, it's about how many you win and what the return on that investment is. So again, that's where the sort of analytics comes in. Even, you know, a wee bit of an aside, but like I'm a massive sports fan, and I love all the sort of the kind of modern approach to sport in terms of data and data science and all this kind of stuff. I love all that as well. So it kind of fits quite well for me in the business as well. I see it as a big opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, as you were talking there, I'm like, my mind's going to regression analysis and all this, trying to understand the correlation between different variables that are potentially impacting like your bid success, but ultimately the return on investment for your business as well. But it also, it's making me scratch my head around just trying to almost coach your clients or your potential clients in a way that they have that data to be able to share. Because I suppose without that data, you know, going in as an input, you struggle to be able to create the insight.
Yeah. And that's, so again, that gap analysis that I talked about from the very start, that's one of the first things that's part of that diagnostic, is to say, you know, how many bids did you bid for last year? What was your success rate? What's the cost of bidding? So how many directors' days are involved? How many operational days are involved, etc., etc., to try and build up that baseline benchmark. Now, what I'm finding is that companies don't have that information, or it's not accurate. So it's not a great reflection. But as we get to work with them, that's some of the things that we look at in more detail. Is, you know, how many days did you spend on these bids? And ultimately as well, that kind of gives you an insight to say, are they spending enough time on these bids? Or, you know, some clients that I've worked with, you know, they do bids over a weekend. Now, without even seeing the bid, I know that that's not enough. So that's number one point of where they're not being successful, is they're not spending enough time. So as you speak to people, there's so many, that's the fascinating thing, there's so many data points or opportunities to, you know, help clients change the way they do things and be more successful.
Yeah, I suppose even just asking your clients for that is showing a level of credibility, professionalism, and strategic approach that even if they don't have the data, they're like, shit, we really should know that. And it's starting to almost coach them and kind of raise your credibility from a support point of view, as in, hey, that like this guy, this company, this is something we might need here. Yeah,
and that the feedback that we've had so far has been really good on these diagnostics. Even as I say, I work with SMEs, but I also work with some pretty well established companies, professional services and construction companies. And the feedback that I've been getting is, you know, I never really thought about that. Even the sort of the aligned marketing strategy and things like that, it's kind of opening people's eyes to different aspects.
Well, even taking it full circle again to how we started this conversation, our experience in the private sector. I mean, if you go in and train those people as well, you can imagine these teams. I mean, the seismic shift of an organisation from what they save and what they resource and everything else, and the mindset as well, to understand that it's not just about how much money you're going to save, it's about aiming for the right targets. It's about putting the right resource on it as well and getting what you want out of that as well. And there's so much benefit in that and so much opportunity for the future as well.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of doing it the way I do it. I mean, there are companies out there and they are good. They're great at what they do, but they just focus solely on helping clients write bids. But that's one way of doing it. I try to take a different approach where it's about, that kind of analytical and strategic approach that I think probably more for the small businesses who maybe their resources are a bit more finite, but just trying to educate them on a different way of doing it.
But I guess it's a universal approach where like a small business or large business as well. Like, it's all about that mindset and understanding relationships and everything else. It goes back to everything we've been discussing, which is fantastic as well. And I've even seen, like, obviously I've looked at I call it your values as well. You talked about honesty, integrity, being the experts. And like Darren mentioned, it's calling these out to clients and saying, do you know what, you're not doing the right thing here, and being honest with them. And that must be quite a hard conversation at first. But again, you get that respect, like Darren was saying as well.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as, if a client's paying me, so I have had it with a client where what we've done is after 6 months, we do sort of independent feedback. So we commission a survey, and one of the pieces of feedback was typical Glaswegian, but they just said, we just want to get telt, T-E-L-T, telt what to do. So
don't we all to some degree?
That's the thing where I feel as a professional, if I'm taking money off someone, whether they like it or not, if I don't think that they're doing it to a high enough standard, because that's maybe one of the downfalls, or you could say it's a good thing that I know what the standard is. So if I see clients falling below that standard, I know that they're not going to be successful. So that is part of what I see my job is that telling people that, if you're not hitting the standard, that's not good enough. And, ultimately, I don't want to be taking money off people just for the sake of it. I'm in this to win it as well. So, that's what I want to try and achieve.
Yeah, but there's something in there around personal responsibility as well, which like jumps out to me around like growth and success. If you want that, being told what to do, it's kind of just delegating and kind of abdicating responsibility for ultimately their business or the growth of their business. So I think there's certainly something in that. Like I'm coming from a coach perspective, I'll sometimes have clients looking for me to give them the advice and the answer, and like what is it that's going to make the difference and change their life. Actually they've got the answers and they need to take that responsibility and ownership of certain things as well. But is what feels great is the fact that you've got the honesty, integrity to call out where the levels of standards basically aren't up to scratch, which is exactly what they'll need.
Yeah, and again, it kind of comes back to that whole fascination with sport and all that kind of stuff. I listen to people talking about the winning mentality, the mindset, the preparation. The same applies for me. The same applies in business. Like, you've got to want to win, or you'll just be part of the crowd, sort of thing. Like, there's only one company that will win this contract, is the way I see it. So if we want to be the one that gets it, then you've got to have the standards, and that's what I'm trying to set. So yeah,
you've always got to stand out. That's the way of it. You can't always just blend in. There's no point. That's the best way. So Paul, obviously we call the podcast Purpose Over Profit. We used to ask people this, but through the conversation, it's just became apparent that it's all about the purpose for you. It's all about the people and everything else. I mean, could you have seen yourself working in the organisation for much longer, or did you just need to jump out and then this is why you've got this inner desire because you've got young kids and everything else? I mean, what did your wife think of it now that you're now, how long is it? Is it a year and a half in?
About a year and a half in now, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt there's days where, you're up and the next day you're down, sort of thing. I think that happens all the time. But, I thought, well, you only get one shot at it, really. And if I'm always going to wonder what if, then it wouldn't have been right. So I thought, well, now's the time. With young kids, I suppose, and a mortgage and everything else, there is a bit of a risk there. But, fortunately, things have worked out well so far. And you still got to keep going and fighting and getting new clients and stuff like that as well. But I wouldn't change it at all. I think I say this a lot, and I don't think people maybe or I'm not sure how seriously people take it, but the feeling that you get when a client phones you and said that they've won the contract that you've helped them with, it's just amazing. It's brilliant. I mean, let's face it, we are in business to kind of earn a living and make money and whatever, but the feeling that you get when you've helped companies and they've not achieved it before, that's just brilliant. And you don't really get, for me, you didn't get that in employment.
That goes back to, I think we all feel this is all because of what you've put into it, isn't it? It's that relationship for all your business days. I'm sure you feel that as well, the coaching as well. It's all about, you're a transformational coach, bloody hell, yeah, you must see that quite a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ownership aspect. It's yours. You recognise it was your vision for the company. You've created it, and you've manifested that change with the client. But yeah, it's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way before. But I think back to my corporate, even the successes that I had in the corporate world, they kind of felt diluted either because someone else had contributed to it. It wasn't mine, or my boss took the kudos for it. I couldn't really step in and own it, and I think that's maybe something that's a real shame, actually, because I think there's a space for that in the corporate world. But yeah, it's great to hear you say that's kind of the buzz that you get from that, from working with your clients just now is fantastic.
Yeah. And similarly, on the other hand, like when they phone you and say we've not won it,
it's all your fault.
I did. No, well, that is the thing, that you feel that guilt and that responsibility, but fortunately, I've had more of the good calls than the bad calls. So
again, that must come back to your analysis to a point. And I mean, that comes back to your data, and you'll be able to build it up, I guess, over time and understand, was it the right contract, everything else. And
yeah.
But yeah, Paul, I'm just going to say, how can people find out more about 4S Bid?
So they can find out more. Our website is www.4sbid.co.uk, or you can find us on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn quite a lot. Just Paul Johnstone, and we've got a company page, 4S Bid. So yeah, and they can reach out anytime.
Anyone you're looking for just now? Any particular businesses that you kind of specialise with, or?
So I would say my specialist area, for no other reason than, when I was in procurement, I seem to do a lot of construction or facilities or sort of trades businesses now. But I do work with marketing agencies, charities, any kind of company. I think the simple thing I would say is it's kind of companies who are committed to success, and by that I mean, maybe don't realise what's involved, and then they think this is too hard and will give up. There is a bit of work involved, but ultimately I'm here to help them to navigate that process and help them win contracts. So it's got to be companies that are, in it for the long haul, and see the benefit of it.
Yeah, definitely. No weekend bids. I think that's the crucial one as well. Nobody wants to bid over a weekend. No, thank you very much, Paul, for jumping on the podcast. And yeah, looking forward to catching up soon and just seeing how it progresses forward.
Great. No, it was good. Great to be on. Thanks very much to both of you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. It's been and I genuinely, I really enjoyed that. I was like, oh man, talking for procurement for like best part of an hour there. But I've stayed awake. But more than that, I didn't even need my coffee this morning. I'd have been fine without it, Paul.
Brilliant. No, good stuff, guys. Thanks.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Pop Pod this week. If you'd like to leave a review or share the podcast with others, then that'd be awesome. You'll find us on Instagram at the Pop Pod, and on Facebook we have a community group called Purpose to Progress that anyone can join. And we'll be back every Monday with a new episode, but until then, stay on purpose and we'll see you next week.